Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Entrepreneurship Speaker Series featuring Emma Willis, who is the Chief Operating Officer at Venture Noire, which is a nonprofit focused on connecting corporations with communities to improve Black business health. She is also a prominent social impact advocate, and Emma's other notable experiences include work as the COO of Suchi, which provides tax advantage savings plans to promote debt-free education, and senior strategy from MHP, which is a digital marketing agency. My name is Rebecca Manning. I will be your moderator for this discussion. I am a chemical biological safety specialist at EHS. I'm also a part-time student in the Dual Masters for Public Health and Nutrition program, as well as the founder of Health Education Advocacy Link, which is a health communication and patient empowerment startup. So to start us off, I have a couple of questions around your previous experiences in this field. So what are the key personal and professional experiences that made social impact the driving force behind your work today?
That's a great question. I'll have to say this started very early on for me. I was raised in a fairly political family, and everything about my life has always been about service and advocacy for others. So started fairly early on. I was that little girl that was always drugged to a political rally or campaign. I was even the one holding the signs on the side of the street sometimes, and just a very active church life as well. And because of that unique position, I've always been in a space of wanting to drive and increase impact and having empathy for others. So really my work is just stems from how I was raised and the community I was brought up in.
Awesome, that's amazing. And we know that there's a face to entrepreneurship, which can promote biases at times and leave less room for accommodating those who don't fit this mold. Can you speak to how you've seen the lens or landscape of entrepreneurship evolve over time?
Oh, I will say that's an interesting question, and it's probably fairly complex and is based off of where you live and what you know as an entrepreneur, right? I'd be quick to say that, entrepreneurs look like an array of individuals. It's a rainbow. One thing I'll tell you is a lot of times people are actively entrepreneurs and have no clue that that's what they're doing. So I'll tell you that the lens of an entrepreneur is one that is still being defined and shaped. We know them to be the people that are willing to risk it all for success and the ability to innovate and spearhead new ideas and in changing the world. So I would say entrepreneurs is really just a lens that is starting to close in. We're giving more emphasis and energy and focus on the people who are actually the heartbeat of America, right? So right now it's the discovery process for America. It's a renaissance period. So we know a good deal about entrepreneurs historically and how our country was shaped. It was entrepreneurs. We just maybe not have called it that, but it's entrepreneurship. So I would say it hadn't really changed. It's really about the focus and intention now that we have on being able to highlight these individuals and the work that they do to really bring together the communities around the country.
Right, that's definitely a great point. And we see this diversity reflected in our everyday lives and how the field is evolving, especially science and tech. So we know also that people choose entrepreneurship for various reasons. The decision may come out of a need, a passion, or even curiosity. However, the initial decision to become an entrepreneur has lasting effects on the individual, the community, or even the industry. So we've seen this reflected in COVID-19 as kind of the prime example of this. So how have you seen these decisions to enter entrepreneurship affecting the scalability and sustainability of ventures today?
Really good question. And I think a lot of what we see is necessity, right? I think COVID did a great deal to make people have to move in ways they weren't traditionally, I think, taught to move. So COVID was the great levelizer of America here recently. It's just a major movement in our society and how things have changed. And last year, there were a lot of people who were displaced and out of work. And they knew in order to make ends meet, they were going to have to do something that was drastically different from going into office and getting a paycheck on a regular basis. And I think what happened in COVID is people had to rely on their gut or their instincts to be able to make a difference in their lives. So if we wanted to continue to eat, have shelter over our heads, we saw a lot of people turn to retail or e-commerce in order to make it through COVID. And I think what a lot of Americans found out is they too are capable of being entrepreneurs. But what I think we need to give attention to is the saturation of entrepreneurship. And a lot of the stats that support that a lot of people traditionally will not make it. But I think we're having to pay real close attention to what came out of COVID and what entrepreneurship is actually getting ready to turn into. You know, I do this work and I always have to pay attention to the trends. There's only so many people, sauces, skincare, healthcare, clothing that we can consume because we are a consumer-based economy. So if everybody on this call is an entrepreneur, I actively probably won't purchase a good deal of your goods if you all are doing the same thing, right? And so we're starting to step into this space where we are going to have to be light on the amount of entrepreneurs we pop out. We do need people to be entrepreneurs, but then when it comes to scale, we need people that are willing to take their risk to level up, and not everybody's suited for that. In our conversation yesterday, I was saying, you know, we talk to entrepreneurs every day, and very few of those individuals are actually interested in growing their company and really having true economic impact in the space that they happen to take up. And what we're talking about right now is the job creation, the responsibility of actually being an entrepreneur and being able to bring jobs and some form of quality of life to the spaces that you take up or inhabit. That's like the next phase of this. And I think a lot of people aren't ready for that next level. We're really good at being a creator in a consumer-based society, but a lot of times we aren't ready for the next phase of scale, growth, and more risk. And I think that's what we're getting ready to have to turn the conversations to, is who's actually ready to be the next Bezos or Sam Walton. And very few people are willing to take that type of plunge. So we're still in a discovery period is what I'll tell you around a lot of this. Saturation in the market space is one thing I'm always concerned about in terms of entrepreneurs. I love all of my founders, but there's only so much we can do in the incubation space when it comes around to me having 7 skincare lines in one spot. It's a really hard thing to move, and it's a hard conversation to have with your founders when you realize that on the other side of that, we're going to have drastically different conversations about what it's going to take for you to get to the next level if that's something you desire. And it's all of that reality that, you know, I have to face on a day-to-day basis in terms of what it is that we want to do in launching healthy Black companies. It's really the honesty and the transparency of the work and what you have to do as an individual to really make it.
Right. That's a really great point. And going off of that, we spoke at length about understanding the difference between entrepreneurship in theory versus entrepreneurship in practice.
Mm.
With this distinction in mind, what systems do you feel could work more synergistically in secondary and higher education institutions seeking to encourage entrepreneurship in communities of color?
That's a really good question. I think one, let's start with how the country is shaped and what we actually see within these institutions. Historically, we still are at an all-time low on minorities attending higher education institutes. So there's probably still a lack of diversity in some of these spaces. I think the next thing in that conversation to consider is really who your entrepreneurs are right now. They aren't traditionally at this point in time people who have who've graduated from a 4-year institution. So I think this is why you see the programs like at CASE and some other schools having to go back in and reach into the community to identify those individuals. So when it comes down to entrepreneurship, I think we're being tasked with redefining how we educate and grow the people who want to move in this space and in this way. I'll tell anybody in a heartbeat, I didn't have a single course in college that prepared me for entrepreneurship. I didn't. And it's really about the application of entrepreneurship that you lack within an institution or within 4 walls. You don't get to practice that too much because there's a balance of finishing that education and getting that degree versus being able to go out and spend 24 hours of each day pouring it into a company or a career that you want to have for yourself externally. And so it's the reconciling of those things that I think we have to, you know, come to. And that's a collaborative effort. It's going to take their universities and the community to come together to be able to figure out how we do more of both. And I think now we're in a unique position, and I'd be interested to see what school looks like in the next 5 years, because entrepreneurs are now 12 years old. My son's an entrepreneur. He has more Upwork clients than I ever had, you know, clients in my life, and he's 16. And I think it's really amazing what's happening. But what I realize is lacking from my son is business acumen. That's something you can get from school. It's just the basics. And I sit here and I study these things and I'm thinking, for the Michael Goldbergs of the world, entrepreneurship is going to be a very interesting space and a very interesting conversation in the next 5 years. You also have the challenge of the creator economy, right? So we talked about that too yesterday, and it's going to be your YouTube, TikTokers that now have a reverse introduction into entrepreneurship, because guess what? They've already monetized themselves. But then the next thing is getting ready to be, is this actively something I can scale? And that is where the hard question comes in, because I would dare to say you can't, because we know just how fickle that space is. It's here today, gone tomorrow. But I think the unique opportunity is taking those TikTokers, YouTubers, or creators and having them understand their responsibility potentially as an intrapreneur, the person that's actively investing in the entrepreneur, which are very two interesting positions, right? Because one can actually help fund and grow the dreams of the entrepreneur while still holding equity and being able to grow their personal wealth. And I think that's what we're doing right now, is understanding that there are individuals who allow the entrepreneurial ecosystem to grow and expand. And that could be your creator community, because now they have these resources over here that can actively, continuously grow and push into our entrepreneurs of tomorrow. And I think it's going to have to be through those lenses and those eyes that we actually see a new wave of investment and, dare I say, of venture capital. It's going to have to come from untraditional spaces and people who move in untraditional ways for us to really start elevating and making a movement and a difference in all of this.
Right, that's a really great point. And we've seen social media become one of the key players in marketing. And so we can often find some of the marketing agencies losing out on work because they already have influencers who are promoting the products for the companies. And so when we acknowledge some of these challenges of entrepreneurs almost becoming millionaires overnight, can you speak to the significance of establishing stable supply chain infrastructure in terms of retail services and manufacturing to promote successful and growth-minded businesses?
Yeah, so you had a couple questions there. So we'll touch on the creator economy first. And, I'll just go back to the fact that we're in a revolution, right? We're all actively having to figure this thing out as we go on a day-to-day basis. And I will tell you again that the creator economy is one that's special right now, just because it's delicate. It could thrive. It could be the next wave of industry that we really have yet to define and put parameters around. But I think we just need to continue to grow with it and stay flexible. But I think it speaks back to now your kids aren't saying, I want to be an NBA player, a doctor, a lawyer. I mean, I hear kids yell at them, be a YouTuber. So, I think schools are getting ready to have to introduce curriculum on how to be an entrepreneur in real time. What are going to be some of those basics and those core things that we need for you to be successful, whether you continue to be that creator or not. And I think that particular argument is going to come back to finance and financial literacy, to be honest, because the one thing we have to actively do as an economy is constantly talk to people about what it is to have wealth and to continuously grow it. And wealth is that legacy piece. Okay, it's not just income. It is literally the disposable extra that you have that you can actively leave behind. And I think your creator's economy is really going to be that space that booms and allows for some of that to happen. And then on the other side, and give me your second question too. I want to make sure I answer everything here.
Sure. Yeah, I was asking if you could speak to the importance of creating a stable supply chain infrastructure.
I will say the importance in doing that is really about America's livelihood. I think if it comes down to it, and we're all being impacted right now, whether you know it or not. I personally, for my birthday, wanted a new iPhone, and it was the 13 Pro. Guess what I couldn't get when I went into Apple was the 13 Pro, and it's all based off of one piece of metal, copper. It's a very interesting thing to have to combat with when you're a human and you have wants. It's like, copper, why? Where? And I think on a daily basis, we focus on the politics, We focus on the things that are noteworthy in the news that happen to distract us from the things that supply our day-to-day, lifestyle. And that's going to be your supply chain. I'm sitting here combating, it wasn't combative. My mom could seem combative, but we were having a conversation about Thanksgiving dinner. There's not a turkey to be bought. And you really don't think about supply chain until it comes down to you needing something from it. And my point here is that I think this is also a space that we need entrepreneurs to focus on. We do have people that actively work on innovation within supply chain, but sometimes that is just solely the technology that supports it. But who is actively at the core of the supply chain to understand logistically how we continue to connect these communities and these countries in order to move goods into places that are lacking or without? And so for me, I think in that question, it's really about entrepreneurs of tomorrow turning their focus on infrastructure. And that's what we don't have enough people planning, because honestly, that's a high stakes place to be in because it takes a lot of money, but infrastructure is key. And the only reason we're talking about supply chain right now is because we're all going to be impacted by the fact that nobody's figured out how to constantly move goods around the country and get things in within a certain period of time.
Really great points. Looks like Professor Goldberg has a question. If you'd like to unmute and ask your question.
Great. Thanks, Rebecca, and Emma, thanks for a great discussion. So for those that are watching on Zoom and for those that are on LinkedIn, I encourage you to look up an article. I mean, there was a Crunchbase put out some data around capital raise, particularly as it related to female and underrepresented minority founders. And the news was mixed, right? So, I mean, on one hand, the increase in funding to Black entrepreneurs in the first half of 2021 was a fourfold increase from last year. So progress on one level, but the numbers, the overall percentage of capital that went to Black entrepreneurs was like 1.2%. So obviously incremental progress, but not significant progress. I wonder if you can talk to that sort of the challenge. I mean, so some might say, "Oh, look at the progress." Others might say, that's not progress because we have such a long way to go. I'm curious if you can comment on the statistics. And I guess the good news is at least people are focused on it. I mean, even Crunchbase putting this data, I find is helping focus conversations on it because the numbers are a piece of the puzzle. But I'd be curious in your perspective.
I would have to say with that, Michael, is that, one, I'm assuming there was some pressure to go out and report that number has upticked from 0.9% to 1.2%. And, you sit there and you do the math on 137 billion and you realize just how little that is. And you could probably almost break it down to the check size, right? I think there's still a great deal of discovery that's going on. And I can say this from a person who's raising a fund right now of $150 million. It's not a lot of money, guys. And I can tell you the biggest concern out there is going to be the number of deals that can actively move through that fund. So you're starting to see the investment community or the investor community actively have to seek out these deals in order to make a case for actually spending more. And I'll tell you, part of the journey and part of our work is having to actually elevate, find, scout, research, and be able to talk about the companies that are doing the work. Because believe it or not, and this is me just, always sitting up doing research, it says there are more Black companies in the med tech space than anything else. I wouldn't know that. That's not a report I readily know. And so when I see 1.2%, I'm thinking, so there's a bunch of deals out there that still could be made, but why aren't these people being discovered? And I think it goes back around to a community that is still not trusting or is still vastly unaware of the resources that exist. Or on the flip, it could still be back around to the practices associated with some of these funds. I think there's probably a mix of all of those things happening right now. And so I think for our investors and the community of venture capitalists or anybody that's doing loans, SBA, bank products, otherwise, there's a real conversation about you being active and actually looking for these companies in order to make the investments. And I'll tell you, we are a fairly lazy society. We're all constantly calling somebody else to see if they've done the work because you don't want to have to do the work. And we're learning that we sit in a unique space and position to be able to support that portion of the narrative. I want to have the CRM that contains all of the Black businesses, and I'm actively doing that right now. You know, it's enough for NAACP saw a need to buy into Angie's List. Did anybody see that? That was actually really smart. So the NAACP is now owns a portion of Angie's List, but guess what NAACP now gets to be? They actually get to be the owner of that directory of Black businesses. Pretty smart. And a Small Business USA. And so you start seeing these things emerge, and you have to know now that 1.2% has to go up next year, because now we're reducing the number of excuses people have for why they don't see or identify the companies to make these investments. And so I stand at the front of that argument. If you tell me you can't find a company to invest in, or you don't see Black businesses that meet your thesis, I'm going to say, here's a list of 72. Okay, this is where you can start. But I think we have to be responsible in that, Professor Goldberg, is that a lot of times nonprofits, we focus on our work, but we haven't figured out how to share. And I think that's a lot of entities. You know, I had this discussion at Washington University not too long ago about the academy protecting its work and not sharing it. I mean, it's the same thing with any other university. You have to share your research and your findings for us to be able to mobilize and be able to support a change in that narrative. And so I think it's an all fronts call. So we need our VCs, we need our education institutions, we need our economic development councils to all come together and share what they actively know to increase deal flow and opportunities for minority founders. And so I think there are a couple of things that we could do there. That 1.2% does not shock me. Just had a conversation last night about the 2.2% of women who receive funding this year. And I'll tell you guys, I actually think that's a low number, and those checks are probably low too. There are a couple of things there that you can look for in that narrative, but we have tremendous amount of work to do. All that article did for me is let me know that there still is a tremendous amount of money out there, and we have a pipeline problem. We hadn't figured out how to connect to our founders, and we hadn't figured out how to create that entire messaging or marketing campaign around the resources that can be provided to our founders.
Amazing answer. And it covered so many bases. And I feel like we can have a whole other discussion just on that topic. It looks like we have another question from Robert, if you'd like to unmute and ask your question.
You guys can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. She kind of like really tapped in on the topic of the question that I had, with the comment of really just more so, it's a question and a comment in the same sense, because it's something to spark the minds to actually piggyback off of what I'm saying. So for me, I see a lot of businesses, these startup businesses, which I help out with doing some behind the scenes work of marketing, websites, so on and so forth, of just getting them ready for the consumer.
Mm-hmm.
How I feel on seeing what happens to these businesses that are trying to survive is that when we talk about minorities and also the situation of things that's going on, I think the number of percentage is low because of control. And for me, the thing is like, I feel like we don't have as much because it's more so a feel of we will take over. But at the end of the day, I feel like really most of the times, all we scream is we want to be the same or as equal. Because the number really we looking for is probably like, hey, can we just bump this number up to at least 10% to start off? And then we'll go from there. So that's my comment on it. And it's really just more so hers, what she said, the fact that it's a multiple of things that may be the reason on why the percentage was low. But I feel like if the percentage was just a little bit higher and the money was cycled a lot faster, like big powerhouse places like Atlanta, a big powerhouse place like LA and Florida, that their money cycles a lot faster. The city of Cleveland has way too many talented people, as well as great businesses and ideas and great innovators, but the money is really the portion to why they have not made it to the eyes of the person that is looking for the next pioneer.
Mm. You know, I'll tell you, I could go back and forth on that one. Honestly, that is actually a pretty complex question to ask in terms of, you know, the 1.2% and how we get it to 10, and even the variables or the factors that play into that money being distributed. You really have to go back to the origin, and that was last year. You know, the Black community had enough. Corporations realized they weren't doing enough, but they also didn't spend the time strategically to create a deployment strategy for those resources. And so we can want that number to be 10%, but I'll always tell you, there is something about caution and taking the time to understand the things that are available that actually makes you better. And we can want these resources tomorrow, but I'll tell you all the resources you don't want. And I'll tell you, for a good deal of our entrepreneurs, if you look at the type of capital that's being deployed, that's mostly venture capital. I'd argue that there are not enough Black businesses that stand ready to actually take venture capital. So really, us creating all of these funds is a conversation in itself. It's the assumption that every Black business is in fact ready for venture capital. And I would tell you right now, Robert, that is not the case. Not everybody should even want venture capital, because some people are actually just business owners, meaning they have no intention to exit. It is going to be a family-held company in perpetuity. It is just going to be a mainstay. Entrepreneurship requires risk, and it requires scale and growth, and it requires an exit. And for a good deal of people in the Black community, primarily, these are not principles or even things that we consider when we start a company. I would tell you, a good deal of the companies we see are born out of necessity, meaning I've lost a job, a major life event occurred, and now I need additional income. Now, whether or not it's a good idea, what I've done, and it's just a placeholder and an opportunity to fill a void in my income, that's one thing. But the companies we actively need to take venture capital are going to be the ones that revolutionize the way we move as Americans. Meaning, you got reg tech, you got fintech, you got all of these spaces we need people to look at. But in order for you to look at these spaces, a lot of times there needs to be some connectivity or education on the issues and the problems that are actively out there that need to be solved. And for the communities who have these startups and some of the businesses, which is why you see so many in service and retail, the barriers of entry are low. The minute I decide that I want to go from just being a service-based company, let's say I do, I'm a janitorial company, okay? 9 times out of 10, the products that I'm using are all chemicals I can purchase from your Home Depot, your Lowe's, so forth and so on. How many of those products that the janitor holds are products that he's created or developed for the sake of being eco-friendly, blah, 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 you name it? That's the founder I need to be able to take that $137 billion that's out there. I don't just need the company with this janitorial, because scaling a service-based company is a very different situation, and you're more likely to take out a debt product. You're going to take out just a standard business loan. You don't need venture capital for that. And so, like, when you present the article of $137 billion with 1.2% of those companies receiving it, you have to really dive into that narrative. That's just a headline. That's clickbait. That's pulling you in, it's getting you fired up, it's getting you upset. But you really have to look at the state of our communities, the founders in them, and really have to ask yourself, are they in fact sitting in a position to take that money? And I would tell you they are not. There is a small fraction of the companies that we actually see that are positioned to take venture capital.
Amazing, amazing points. And even in our conversation, you mentioned something that was startling to me. There's only 7 Black-owned manufacturing companies. And I was curious, you know, with this point being made, how does Venture Noire start to bridge these gaps? And what metrics do you use to measure your success?
So I'll tell you, we've been at this now since 2019. Our first grant was literally to decide whether or not there was an appetite for the work that we do and whether or not there was real need, right? So that was step one. We got to touch over 1,000 companies in year one. 2020 was all COVID, but it was the opportunity for us to dig a little deeper and what the need was for the community we seek to serve. And what we found out is pretty much everything I just said. There's a great deal of organization and work that needs to be done to define what we need to be able to grow our communities and this economy overall. And for Black people, we need job creation, right? We need to actively create jobs, and that's a real hard place to move into, because most companies really just want to move to the Black. They want to get out of the red, they want to be profitable, and they just want to have an income at the end of the week. But when we started looking at our work, we realized we sit in a position of economic development through the development of entrepreneurs. That's literally what we do. We literally are an economic development firm. Okay, at the core of everything is we're trying to bring jobs to communities. And the person that's going to be able to do that is your entrepreneur. So we took a step back and we said, you know, what are we noticing? We noticed that our Black founders were coming in and representing just about every industry. 70% of our founders were women, Black women, which presents its own issues and a conversation all into itself. And so what we had to learn from our outcomes this year is that, one, the assessment or the interview process associated with our founders was going to have to be pretty rigid. It may seem unfair, but let me tell you why. When you go through the process of being accelerated or you sit in an incubator, there's a real come to Jesus moment and some reconciling that has to happen with individuals. And it's whether or not this path is actually for you. So now we find ourselves being fairly intensive because I can't lie to you about the fact that this is not an easy path. Things may not go the way you intend for, and you probably aren't going to get venture capital based off of what we all publicly know. So what do I have to do? I am now standing here trying to give birth through fire, essentially. So we're now digging in. Your finances matter. And it's not just your business finances, it's your personal finances. Because guess what? Those two things have to reconcile in order for you to get that product that you're looking for to help you scale or grow. And so we start with the hard conversations. It's finances first. You got to be open to the process. We have to start with the basic principles and the core of where most things go wrong. And it's people's understanding and their relationship with money. Ta-da, financial literacy is back in it. Education matters, right? We just come back to the same themes every single time. And people don't realize that, we talk about education up here, but really there's these basic guiding principles and concepts we all need as a person. It was me learning how to write a check in elementary school. Didn't matter then, but now it matters now. Okay, balancing that checkbook, it equally matters. Me understanding my credit score, me understanding what collateral, what assets, what all of these different terms mean, they all come back full circle to you as a business owner. So we have to be able to sit with you and actively talk to you about these things openly. Your candidness and your ability to absorb feedback is critical in this position. Okay. And a lot of times we'll call a business our baby, and guys, it's probably the last thing you should do because you're going to be attached to a baby. You're not going to be objective about your baby. And this is why there are no ugly babies, because nobody wants to call their baby ugly. And I will tell you guys, there are ugly babies. They do exist. And so you just have to be honest with yourself in the process and the course of going through this. And this is where we are with our founders. It's also about self-mastery when it comes to our founders as well, because a lot of times we'll get to imposter syndrome. We had this discussion yesterday. And so we need to talk to you about how you feel about your company, about yourself, and the things that you're actively sacrificing for the success of this thing, right? Self-mastery comes into play. I need to be able to talk to you about the things that you didn't hear as a child, why you don't have the confidence and the perseverance to push through some of these things. So that's where we sit. And that's a good chunk of maybe the first 2 weeks for our founders in reality, is those very basic things. Then we move on to what is the guts of the company. And this is you bringing out your business model. I do not want your lean canvas. I don't. I personally need to understand that lean canvas is an abridged version. Sorry. Can you guys hear the dogs barking? Okay, 1 second. Okay, it's over. So I think what we have to understand is that there's no shortcuts to being successful. And I just had this conversation yesterday, and I'm so sorry. There's clearly somebody on the front line. But we had 1 second.
We're a dog-friendly event.
Indeed.
I was just saying, maybe we'll put, as Emma attends to her dog crew, I was just saying to Rebecca, we probably have time for one more question. So if there's an audience member that wants to ask the last one, otherwise we'll give the moderator. What did you
I'm back. I apologize.
Throw them some snacks or something? How did you get them to?
No, my one of my teammates was showing up at my house, and they were just dancing in the window waiting for him to come in. But no, I just want to get back to that. Is that it's a fairly intensive process, and we don't take this lightly, because if you're willing to sacrifice so much of your time, money, and energy, we have to be equally serious. And so this isn't a light process for anyone. And I think we have to be that responsible to you and your time. You know, that's why we spend our time raising the money for the program to be as substantial. We bring in experts. We want you to leave knowing that this is your alumni. You literally come back to us for any questions. We build in the support system. We stick with you for all the questions, awkward or otherwise. And we want you to be a part of this family, because we learned that a lot of times other entrepreneurs don't lean in and support each other. And we've had to create that community that even though your companies may not look the same, I can guarantee you there are 2 or 3 things in your story that will be similar to the people around you. And so we need them to learn how to actively support and lean on one another. But it also speaks to what opportunities come out of programs like this, is that sometimes your greatest pivot and greatest opportunity is learning how to bring in other people to help drive success. And, you know, I've seen companies dissolve because other founders figured out how to come alongside one another and create something far more substantial than both of them ever thought of. And that goes back to a really good principle on teams. Like, we start a lot of times these journeys as solopreneurs, and the first thing people will tell you is, where's the rest of your team? That team is equally important in this. You got to have people around you to support you and keep moving. So in the 8 weeks you spend with Venture Noire, it's fairly intensive. They meet 3 times a week. They all are required to do that. That's one thing you have to say as soon as you start, is that you will in fact agree to be available for all of our classes as well as the homework. And they do get homework. And a lot of it is fairly personal. They have to spend the time with that. And so our greatest outcome has just been honesty on this one. We really did a survey where they could give us all of their feelings within paragraphs. And I mean, I enjoy that, because reading through it makes us better. But it also lets us know that focus absolutely matters, which is why you see us going into CPG next year. And that one cohort is fairly substantial, because now we're sitting in a place where we want to actively give these VCs the deal flow that they actively want. And we're vetting them, and we're make sure that they're actually ready for the work. I mean, and there's a lot of things we have to cover in this now, but it's our responsibility. If we want to see it happen, we actually are having to put in the time and the work to make sure we get those outcomes.
Amazing. And I actually think you answered a question in the chat with that answer as well. So I'll go ahead and ask my final question, then I'll pass it back to Professor Goldberg. So a common theme that I've noticed in your previous media mentions is the importance of articulating your why. Notably, as entrepreneurs of color, we often intertwine this why with firsthand experiences. So how would you suggest leveraging the strength behind your narrative to encourage representation in the startup space?
Yeah, I think the why actually is a huge connection point. So as humans, the most honest level of us is our feelings and our ability to connect. So even if I never see you in person, and Professor Goldberg said that to you at the beginning, I feel like we know each other really well, even though we hadn't met in person. You know, that is a really good reason why the why is important, right? It's a connection point. If I'm able to tell you that my work stems from my need to be of service and to make as much of a difference in people's lives as I can while I have time here on earth, that's the truth. A lot of people will lean into that and they can see, oh, Emma is really service oriented and she's here for me. You need that connection. The why matters. So just me talking to you yesterday, Rebecca, and understanding that you do your work because you understand all of the health problems that plague minority communities, I can actually feel that because now I can recognize a family member who's dealing with said issues. And that's when you get back to your why. And that honestly should be everybody's North Star. You have to have something that anchors you in your work. And it's you being able to deadlift, but focusing on a single point in the wall. You can push through it as long as you have this one thing to anchor you and why you're actually in this spot. However uncomfortable it is, the why will always be the accelerant and the thing that allows you to push through and move past a lot of those things.
Amazing. So I'll pass it back to Professor Goldberg. I see one other question if you want to address it quickly.
Sure. What is the question?
Looks like when, let me just read it just for our LinkedIn. Okay. It says, Lindsay had asked, when will the next cohort start for In the Black?
So our next cohorts kick off in March. The process for that will start opening applications the second week in December. And then we'll move through our interview processes, and I'll make sure I share that information back with the case team here so that they can push that out.
Awesome. Wow, that went fast. Rebecca, awesome job moderating, really thoughtful questions, and great to have you on our campus engaging in your staff role and in your startup role. It's really wonderful to see our community trying to burn the candle at both ends. I mean, so many entrepreneurs, like ones on here, are doing a lot, and you're a great case study of that. So thank you. Emma, this is great. I mean, we're so thrilled that James connected us. It was awesome having you in Cleveland. Great discussion today. Glad folks could come out. I did share, and thank you. Rebecca shared the website here on Zoom. It's venturenoire.org, just for anybody who's watching on LinkedIn as well. We have a couple more events this year. We're sort of winding down as the semester ends and the holidays approach. Robert, I did put in the chat, you had mentioned Atlanta. Monica Hooks is a friend of mine from Wharton, is Atlanta's executive director for their women's entrepreneurship initiative. So, and she's a former exec in the music and media business. So join us on December 1st at noon, and you can talk to Monica about what's working well in Atlanta or what things we might learn from a place like Cleveland. So with that, have a wonderful Thanksgiving if we don't connect before then, and a great holiday season. And Emma and Rebecca, thank you both for your time.
Thank you. Thank you guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Have a great one.
Bye.